Well, today we enter Holy Week, this last week of our Lenten journey. We began with the story of Jesus' temptation in the wilderness. Jesus' own temptation ultimately is the same that we have. Because what Jesus was ultimately tempted to do was to strike out on his own and try to be a Messiah according to his own wisdom and understanding instead of according to God's. He was tempted to turn boulders into bread, to take the authority of the world by idolatry, and by receiving human praise by spectacle. Yet Jesus overcomes all that in the wilderness and then spends 3 years of his ministry following God in God's way of being a Messiah. Because as our epistle told us, Jesus is in the very nature God. He already is God, yet he does not consider it as something to be grasped or exploited for his benefit. Rather, he humbles himself, he lowers himself, he empties himself, he condescends, that is, he goes down with us and becomes a servant, a slave. He is obedient, following God's wisdom, even when it contains a shameful death upon the cross. He has set his mind, he fixed his will on the ways and wisdom of God. In so doing, he shows the humility and obedience that is expected of all of us. And because he has done it, he then is exalted above all others, restored back to his place at God's right hand. Palm Sunday begins then the final demonstration of this emptying of the life of Jesus. We begin the Passion in victory, or so it seems. What kind of Messiah is Jesus going to be? The triumphal entry makes it seem like he's going to be the military Messiah that everyone wanted. Luke gives us this fun detail that he tells his disciples, get a few swords this time round. The people go out to meet him and bring him back into the city just as they would an emperor or a conquering general returning home. But through the week leading to Passover, which we now call Holy Week, Jesus shows that he is not willing to be the kind of Messiah that the human wisdom wants. He will be the Messiah that God's wisdom requires. So instead of him swinging a sword and chasing out all the Romans, we see him arguing with religious leaders, avoiding their traps and shaming them in front of the people. At the Last Supper, knowing that he will be betrayed, he still does not stop and rather follows God's wisdom to share a meal with the one who will hand him over to death. In the garden he goes and he asks God one last time, is there not another way? Take this cup from me. But not my will, but your will, O God, be done. And so when Judas comes with his armed crowd, he does not resist, though his disciples do. And even in the midst of that, he heals those who were struck. They had the swords and everything. They were ready to start this party. But Jesus stops. This was not the way of God. And so he submits to being arrested. He is obedient during his sentencing, silent before the crowd, which just a few days before had hailed him as king and now seem to think they're not really interested in what he has to offer. They trade his life for a convicted murderer, though he is innocent. He suffers the jeers and beatings of the soldiers and is led away to be crucified. Upon the cross, he cries out to God, knowing that this too is God's wisdom. He ignores the mockery of the religious leaders who say that the King of Israel would be saved by God, not crucified by the Romans. But they still do not yet understand. And so Jesus prays for their forgiveness. They do not have that same mind as Jesus. Their minds are set on the things of men, of the earthly kingdoms that they wish to rule. Jesus' mind is set on God and the things of heaven. And so he follows God's wisdom, taking the very form of a slave, being obedient even to death on a cross, the most shameful and painful death known at the time. He is executed for crimes he did not commit. And his suffering is for those who turned him over. He seeks not to exalt himself, but to humble himself for the world he loves. If we gathered here take the name of Christ upon ourselves and are calling ourselves Christians, then that is the mindset we are to have in our life as well. Paul calls us to have the mind of Christ in us, the attitude, the willingness to humble ourselves, to accept God's wisdom, to follow it, even when it might mean our suffering and death. In Jesus, we see not only what it means to be God, but what it means to be human. What it is like to humble ourselves and follow God's wisdom through pain and suffering, though we are innocent. And as Paul reminds us and encourages us, if we suffer with him, then we will indeed be raised with him to new life at the last day. In the end, we will indeed receive, as Jesus received, all that God has offered. We will come to be like him, to live with him, and to share in the glorious life of God. And of that glorious and blessed life, there will be no end. I pray then that our Holy Week leads us again into the contemplation of these mighty acts whereby God has brought us back to him. Amen.